The massive space station hung in the darkness between stars like a glowing jewel. Nexus Prime was the most important meeting place in known space. Ships from dozens of worlds docked at its ports every day. Today was special, though. Today, the Galactic Council would meet the newest species to reach the stars. Jake Morrison stood at the window of his small quarters and watched the alien ships arrive. Each one was bigger than anything humans had ever built. The Vorthak warship looked like a giant metal beast with weapon ports covering its black hull. The Zelthan vessels sparkled like cut crystal and seemed to bend light around it. Even the smallest alien ship could probably destroy every human city on Earth. Jake pulled at his dress uniform. The fabric felt too tight around his thin shoulders. At 26 years old, he stood barely 5.5 feet tall and weighed maybe 140 pounds. His brown hair was cut short in military style, but it did nothing to make him look more impressive. He had joined the Space Force 3 years ago, never thinking he would end up as humanity's representative to alien races. The door to his room chimed. "Come in," Jake said. Captain Lisa Green entered, looking worried. She was the senior officer on their small ship, the Endeavor. "Jake, we have a problem. Ambassador Carter's shuttle had engine trouble. She won't make it here for another 6 hours. Jake felt his stomach drop. "What about the rest of the diplomatic team?" "Same shuttle." "You're it, Lieutenant. You're the only human representative we have right now." Jake sat down hard on his narrow bed. This was not how things were supposed to go. He was just a junior officer. His job was to carry bags and take notes. He was not supposed to speak for all of humanity. "I can't do this, Captain. I don't know anything about diplomacy. I'm just a soldier." Captain Green sat beside him. "Jake, I know this is scary, but you're smart and you're honest. Sometimes that's more important than fancy words." "Look at me," Jake said, spreading his arms. "I'm small even for a human. These aliens are going to think we're all weak." "Maybe. That's not such a bad thing," Captain Green said quietly. "Let them underestimate us. You might learn something useful." An hour later, Jake walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime. The station was built for beings much larger than humans. The ceilings were 30 feet high, and the doorways were wide enough for 3 humans to walk through side by side. Everything was made of smooth metal that seemed to glow with its own light. Other beings moved through the corridors around him. Jake tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to look. The ethereals floated past like living clouds of colored gas. Vantari moved on 6 legs, their insect heads turning to watch him with compound eyes. Even the most human-like aliens were still clearly not human. The meeting room was enormous. A circular table sat in the center with chairs built for dozens of different body types. Jake found the section marked for humans and sat in a chair that made him feel like a child at the adults' table. The other delegates began to arrive. Each one was impressive in their own way. The Zelthan representative looked like living crystal shaped into the form of a tall, thin person. Light moved through, their body in patterns that might have been their way of thinking. The ethereal delegate was a swirling mass of purple and gold gas that somehow managed to look dignified. Then General Krikstar entered the room. The Vorthak general was massive. He stood nearly 9 feet tall and was built like a mountain of muscle, covered in natural armor. His reptilian face was scarred from battles on a dozen worlds. When he walked, each step made the metal floor ring like a bell. His yellow eyes swept the room, taking in each delegate before stopping on Jake. The general's lipless mouth pulled back in what might have been a smile, showing rows of sharp teeth. "So this is the human delegation," he said in perfect English. His voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. Jake stood up as straight as he could. "Yes, sir. I am Lieutenant Jake Morrison, representing humanity." General Krikstar looked Jake up and down slowly. Then he began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. "This is what humans send to speak for their species? A child who looks like he would break in a light breeze?" Some of the other delegates began to whisper among themselves. Jake felt his face turn red, but he kept his voice steady. "I may be young, General, but I speak with the full authority of my government." "Authority?" the general repeated, still chuckling. "What authority can such a weak creature possibly have? He walked around Jake like a predator circling prey. I have conquered 17 star systems. I have led armies across the surfaces of burning worlds. And they send me this? The Zelthan delegate spoke, their voice like music made of light. General, Crickster, perhaps we should focus on the diplomatic matters at hand. Diplomatic matters. The general's laugh got louder. Look at this creature. His people cannot even build proper warships. Their entire fleet would not challenge one of our destroyers. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was going worse than he had imagined. General, humanity prefers peaceful solutions to conflicts. We believe that different species can work together for mutual benefit. Peaceful solutions, General Crickstar repeated mockingly. Yes, I suppose that is what prey animals would prefer. He leaned down until his scarred face was inches from Jake's. But the galaxy is not a peaceful place, little human. The strong survive, and the weak become servants. The Mantari delegate clicked their approval. The general speaks wisdom. We have seen what happens to species that cannot defend themselves. Perhaps, said the ethereal delegate, their gaseous form shifting colors, the humans require protection. The Vorthak Empire has protected other young species before. Jake felt the conversation slipping away from him. Every word made humanity sound weaker and more helpless. We don't need protection. Humans can take care of themselves. General Crickstar straightened up and crossed his massive arms. Can you? Your military records show that humans fight each other constantly. Your wars are small and limited. You have never faced a real enemy. We've had our share of conflicts, Jake said carefully. Conflicts, the general snorted. Throwing rocks at each other over patches of dirt. You call that warfare? He turned to address the other delegates. I have studied the human military. Their soldiers are small and weak. Their weapons are primitive. Their armor is barely better than clothing. The room fell silent. Jake could feel the eyes of every delegate on him. He was supposed to represent humanity, but he had no idea what to say. Everything the general said was true from their perspective. Human ships were tiny compared to alien vessels. Human soldiers were smaller than most alien warriors. Human technology was centuries behind what these beings took for granted. The question before this council, General Crickstar continued, is whether humanity deserves to be treated as an equal member of galactic civilization, or whether they should be placed under the protection of a stronger species. Protection, Jake said quietly. Yes, protection. The Vorthak Empire has a long tradition of guiding younger species. We provide security, technology, and guidance in exchange for resources and loyalty. Jake felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. The general was talking about making humanity into servants, but he was using nice words to make it sound like a favor. The Zelthan delegate spoke again. Perhaps we should hear what the human has to say about his species' capabilities. All eyes turned to Jake. He was one small human in a room full of beings who could probably conquer his entire world without much effort. But he was also the only voice humanity had right now. General Crickstar, Jake said slowly, you seem very confident about human limitations. I am confident because I have studied your species thoroughly. You are weak, small, and divided. These are facts, not opinions. Jake looked around the room at all the powerful beings watching him. Then he looked back at the massive general who towered over him like a living mountain. General, Jake said quietly, would you be interested in testing those facts? General Crickstar's yellow eyes glowed with interest at Jake's quiet challenge. The massive Vorthak warrior leaned back and studied the small human with new attention. Around the circular table, the other alien delegates shifted in their seats. The air in the room seemed to grow thick with tension. Testing facts? The general rumbled. An interesting choice of words, little human. What kind of test did you have in mind? Jake felt his heart beating faster, but he kept his voice calm. You seem to know a lot about human military capabilities, General. Perhaps you would like to demonstrate the difference between our species. The Mantari delegate clicked their mandibles together in what Jake had learned was their version of laughter. The small creature wishes to challenge General Krikstar. This should be amusing. Very amusing, agreed the Soren representative, a lizard-like being almost as large as the Vorthak general. I have seen the general tear apart battle mechs with his bare hands. Jake looked around the room at the assembled delegates. Each one represented a species that could destroy humanity without much effort. But they were all watching him now with curiosity instead of dismissal. That was something at least. I'm not suggesting we fight, Jake said quickly. This is a diplomatic meeting after all. But perhaps a simple demonstration of strength would settle the question of human limitations. General Krikstar stood up, to his full height of nearly 9 feet. His massive frame cast a shadow over Jake's position at the table. A demonstration of strength, he repeated slowly. Yes, I think that would be very educational for everyone present. The ethereal delegate swirled their gaseous form in patterns that indicated concern. Perhaps this is not wise. We are here for diplomatic discussions, not physical contests. On the contrary, said the Zelthon representative, their crystalline body flashing with internal light. Understanding the physical capabilities of member species is quite relevant to diplomatic relations. How can we assign appropriate roles in galactic civilization without this knowledge? Jake felt a chill run down his spine. They were talking about assigning roles to humanity like they were deciding what job to give a new employee. The idea that humans might be treated as equals was slipping away with every word. Exactly, General Krikstar said with satisfaction. If humans are to join galactic civilization, we must understand their proper place in it. Some species are natural warriors, others are scholars, still others are suited for labor or resource extraction. And what role do you see for humanity, General? Jake asked. The Vorthak warrior made a sound that might have been considered thoughtful, if it came from a smaller being. Humans are small and weak, but they seem intelligent enough. Perhaps they could serve as administrators or technicians under proper supervision. Their small size might make them useful for maintaining equipment in confined spaces. Jake felt his hands clench into fists under the table. The general was talking about turning humans into maintenance workers and clerks for alien civilizations. That's very generous of you, General, but I think you might be surprised by human capabilities. Surprised? General Krikstar laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. Young human, I have fought battles across 17 star systems. I have seen every type of warrior that exists in this galaxy. There are no surprises left for me. The Mantari delegate leaned forward on their 6 legs. The general speaks truth. The Vorthak military has detailed files on thousands of species. Their assessments are never wrong. Never wrong, Jake repeated quietly. That's quite a claim. It is not a claim, the general said, his voice growing harder. It is a fact proven in battle. When the Vorthak evaluate a species' military potential, we are always correct. Jake stood up from his chair. Even standing, the top of his head barely reached the general's chest. Always correct, he said. Then you wouldn't mind proving it. The room fell silent. Every delegate stared at the small human who had just challenged the most feared warrior in the known galaxy. General Krikstar looked down at Jake with something that might have been amusement or might have been hunger. Prove it, the general said slowly. Yes, I think that would be very instructive. What do you propose, little human? Jake's mind raced. He had started this conversation without any real plan. Now he was committed to something that could either save humanity's future or destroy it completely. A simple test of strength, as you suggested. Nothing dangerous, just a demonstration. Excellent, General Krikstar said, his scarred face splitting into a predatory grin. I accept your challenge, but let us make it interesting. Interesting how? The general walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of Jake. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His natural armor plating was covered with scars from battles that had probably destroyed entire cities. His claws were as long as Jake's fingers and looked sharp enough to cut through steel. If I win this contest, the general said, humanity accepts Vorthak protection and guidance. Your species will become a client state of our empire. Jake felt his blood turn to ice water. And if I win? If you win? General Krikstar chuckled. Then I will recommend that humanity be granted full membership in galactic civilization, with all the rights and privileges that entails. The other delegates began to murmur among themselves. This was no longer just a simple demonstration. The future of humanity was now riding on whatever contest Jake had just agreed to. "This is highly irregular," the ethereal delegate said, their gaseous forms shifting through worried colors. "The fate of an entire species should not be decided by a single contest." "Why not?" asked the Soren representative. "Physical strength is the foundation of all civilization. A species that cannot defend itself has no right to independence." The Zelthan delegate's crystalline form flashed with rapid internal lights. "I must agree with my Soren colleague. If the humans are truly capable of defending themselves, they should be able to demonstrate this fact." Jake realized that he had walked into a trap. The aliens had been planning this from the beginning. They wanted to test humanity's strength, and now they had maneuvered him into providing that test. If he backed down now, it would confirm their opinion that humans were weak and cowardly. "Very well," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I accept your terms, General." General Krikstar's grin got wider, showing more of his razor-sharp teeth. "Excellent. I suggest we use the station's gymnasium. It has equipment suitable for testing various types of physical capabilities." "What kind of test?" Jake asked. "Oh, I think we should be comprehensive," the general said, his tone becoming almost cheerful. "Tests of strength, endurance, speed, and combat capability. We want to give humanity every possible chance to prove themselves, don't we?" Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air in the meeting room. He had expected a simple arm wrestling contest or weightlifting competition. Now the general was talking about multiple tests that would push him to his absolute limits. "That sounds fair," Jake said, though nothing about this situation felt fair at all. "Wonderful." General Krikstar clapped his massive hands together with a sound like thunder. "Shall we proceed to the gymnasium immediately? I find that physical tests are much more reliable than lengthy speeches." The other delegates began to stand up from their chairs. Jake realized that they were all planning to watch this contest. Word would spread throughout the station and then to every world in known space. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine how humanity was viewed by every alien species in the galaxy. "One moment," Jake said. "I should contact my ship and inform them of what's happening." "Of course," the general said generously. "Take all the time you need to prepare. Send for any equipment or assistance you require. I want this to be completely fair." Jake activated his communication device and sent a brief message to Captain Green on the Endeavor. He couldn't explain the full situation in a short message, but he tried to give her enough information to understand that humanity's future was at stake. Within minutes, he received a reply. "Jake, whatever you're planning, be careful. We believe in you. Do what you have to do." Jake closed the communication device and looked around the room at the assembled alien delegates. Each one was now watching him with intense interest. He was about to become either humanity's greatest hero or its greatest failure. "I'm ready," Jake said. General Krikstar gestured toward the door with one of his massive clawed hands. "Then let us begin your education, little human. It's time to learn your species' proper place in the galaxy." The gymnasium on Nexus Prime was enormous. The ceiling stretched up into darkness and the floor was covered with equipment built for beings of all shapes and sizes. Weight machines designed for four-armed aliens sat next to running tracks with adjustable gravity settings. Combat simulation pods lined one wall like giant metal eggs. Jake stood in the center of the room and tried not to feel overwhelmed. Around the edges of the gymnasium, dozens of alien beings had gathered to watch. Word of the contest had spread quickly through the station. Representatives from species Jake had never seen before filled the viewing areas. Some looked curious, others looked amused, and a few looked hungry. General Krikstar strode into the room like he owned it. The massive Vorthak warrior had removed his formal diplomatic robes and now wore only a simple combat harness that showed off his incredible physique. His natural armor plating gleamed under the bright lights, and every step he took made the metal floor ring. "Impressive, isn't it?" the general said, gesturing at the equipment around them. "This gymnasium serves beings from over 200 different worlds. Every possible test of physical capability can be performed here. Jake nodded and tried to look confident. He had removed his dress uniform jacket and stood in his simple white undershirt and black pants. Next to the general's impressive form, he looked like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. The other delegates from the diplomatic meeting had taken seats in the viewing area. The Zelthan representative sparkled like a living gemstone, while the ethereal delegate swirled in patterns that showed great interest. Even beings that Jake didn't recognize had come to watch the small human face the famous Vorthak general. Now, then, General Krikstar said, rubbing his massive hands together, where shall we begin? I think a simple test of lifting strength would be appropriate. After all, if a warrior cannot lift heavy objects, how can he carry weapons and armor into battle? Jake looked at the weightlifting station the general indicated. The machine was built like an altar to strength, with bars and plates that could challenge the strongest beings in known space. That sounds fair, Jake said. Excellent. General Krikstar walked over to the machine and began selecting weight plates. Each plate was as large as a dinner table and marked with symbols that Jake couldn't read. I'll start with something simple. Perhaps 500 of your Earth pounds. The watching aliens murmured among themselves. Jake heard several comments about how that much weight would crush most beings instantly. The general loaded the plates onto the bar with casual ease as if they weighed nothing at all. Your turn, little human, General Krikstar said with a grin. Jake approached the weight machine. The bar was positioned at chest height, and he could see his reflection in the polished metal of the plates. He looked small and fragile compared to the massive amount of weight in front of him. He gripped the bar with both hands. The metal felt cold against his palms. Around the room, the alien spectators fell silent. This was the moment when they would see just how weak humans really were. Jake lifted. The weight came up smoothly. Not easily, but without the struggle that everyone expected. Jake held the bar at full extension for several seconds, then lowered it back to the starting position with perfect control. The silence in the room became absolute. General Krikstar stared at Jake with his mouth slightly open. That was unexpected, he said slowly. Should I do it again? Jake asked politely. No, the general said quickly. That was quite sufficient. He paused, clearly thinking. Perhaps we should increase the weight. Just to be thorough, you understand? For the next 30 minutes, General Krikstar kept adding weight to the bar. Each time he was certain that he had found Jake's limit. Each time Jake lifted the weight cleanly and controlled it perfectly. The alien spectators began to whisper, more urgently among themselves. This was not going according to anyone's expectations. The small human who looked like he might blow away in a strong wind was matching a legendary Vorthak warrior pound for pound. By the time they reached 1,200 pounds, General Krikstar was starting to show strain. His massive muscles bulged with effort, and sweat beaded on his armored hide. Jake, meanwhile, looked like he was warming up for a real workout. This is impossible, muttered the Sauron delegate from the viewing area. No being that small should be able to lift such weight. Perhaps the gravity on their world is different, suggested the Mantari representative. Some species adapt to unusual conditions. Jake heard the comments but said nothing. He simply waited for General Krikstar to decide on the next test. The general was staring at him with a mixture of confusion and growing concern. Very well, the general said finally. Strength is only one aspect of warrior capability. What about speed and agility? He led Jake to a different section of the gymnasium where obstacle courses could be programmed for different species. We'll use a standard Vorthak military course, the general explained. It tests speed, jumping ability, and coordination under combat conditions. The course materialized around them as holographic projectors activated. Walls, barriers, and moving targets filled the space. It looked like a three-dimensional maze designed by someone who wanted to make it as difficult as possible. I'll demonstrate. First, General Krikstar said. This will give you an idea of what's expected. The general began to move through the course. Despite his massive size, he was surprisingly quick and agile. He leaped over barriers, rolled under moving obstacles, and struck targets with precision that spoke of years of training. When he finished, the holographic display showed his time. 2 minutes and 43 seconds. A respectable time, the general said, though he was breathing hard. The course record is held by a Vorthak Special Forces operative at 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Jake studied the course layout. It was complex, but he could see the optimal path through it. May I try now? Of course, General Krickstar said. Take your time to study the obstacles. I want this to be fair. Jake walked to the starting position. Around the gymnasium, the alien spectators leaned forward in their seats. They had seen him match the general in strength, but speed was different. Surely a being so small couldn't move fast enough to challenge a trained Vorthak warrior. Ready? The general asked. Jake nodded. Begin. Jake moved. To the watching aliens, he seemed to blur. Where General Krickstar had used strength to overcome obstacles, Jake flowed around them like water. He didn't jump over barriers so much as glide over them. Moving targets that had challenged the general seemed to slow down for Jake, allowing him to strike them with casual precision. Halfway through the course, Jake realized that he was holding back. His instincts were telling him to move faster, to push harder, but he was trying not to show off too much. That restraint almost cost him when a swinging barrier came closer than expected. Jake stopped holding back. He finished the course in 1 minute and 58 seconds. The gymnasium fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's life support systems seemed to pause. Jake stood at the finish line, not even breathing hard, while every alien in the room stared at him in shock. General Krickstar walked over to the timing display and studied it carefully. 1 minute, 58 seconds, he read aloud. That's a new course record. Jake shrugged. I got lucky on a couple of the obstacles. Lucky, the general repeated flatly. Around the room, alien spectators began talking in urgent whispers. Jake caught fragments of conversation in different languages, but the tone was the same everywhere. Confusion, surprise, and growing concern. General, Jake said quietly, is there another test you'd like to try? General Krickstar looked at Jake for a long moment. The Vorthak warrior's expression was no longer amused or confident. For the first time since Jake had met him, the general looked uncertain. Yes, he said slowly. I think we need to test combat capability. After all, strength and speed mean nothing if a warrior cannot apply them effectively in battle. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had been holding back on the physical tests, trying not to completely humiliate the general in front of the watching aliens, but a combat test would be different. If General Krickstar decided to make it a real fight, Jake might have to show capabilities that would change everything. What kind of combat test? Jake asked. General Krickstar's scarred face split into a grin that showed all of his razor-sharp teeth. Oh, I think a full simulation would be appropriate. Combat armor, weapons, realistic battlefield conditions. We want to be thorough, don't we? Jake looked around the gymnasium at all the watching aliens. He could see the hunger in their eyes now. They had come expecting to watch a small human be humiliated by a famous warrior. Instead, they were seeing their assumptions about humanity challenged in ways they never expected. Full combat simulation, Jake said. That sounds fair. Excellent, General Krickstar said. Let's see what humans are really made of. The combat simulation chamber was a sphere 20 feet across made of metal so dark it seemed to absorb light. Jake stood outside it and watched technicians prepare the system. Cables and sensors covered every inch of the inner surface, ready to create any battlefield the operators could imagine. General Krickstar emerged from an equipment room wearing full Vorthak battle armor. The suit made him look even more massive and dangerous than before. Thick plates of composite metal covered his body, and weapon ports lined his arms and shoulders. A helmet shaped like a predator's skull completed the intimidating image. Impressive, Jake said, though he felt his mouth go dry. The general now looked like a walking tank designed specifically for killing. Standard Vorthak military equipment, the general replied, his voice amplified and distorted by the helmet's speakers. This armor can stop plasma bolts and kinetic rounds. The weapon systems include particle beams, explosive charges, and close combat tools. Jake looked at the much simpler equipment the technicians had provided for him. Human military gear looked primitive compared to alien technology. His armor was thinner, his weapons smaller, and everything about his loadout screamed that humanity was centuries behind the rest of the galaxy. "Don't worry, little human," General Krikstar said with amusement clear in his electronic voice. "The simulation will compensate for the difference in our equipment. We want this to be fair after all." Around the chamber, the alien spectators had grown to a crowd of several hundred beings. Representatives from dozens of species filled every available viewing space. Jake could see news recording devices pointed at him from multiple angles. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would be broadcast to every world in known space. The Zelthan delegate approached the control panel. "What type of simulation would you prefer, General?" "Something challenging," Krikstar replied. "Perhaps the Siege of Korath Prime. That was a particularly difficult urban combat scenario." Jake felt his blood chill. He had read about the Siege of Korath Prime in the intelligence files. The Vorthak Empire had destroyed an entire civilization during that battle. Millions had died as the Vorthaks demonstrated what happened to species that resisted their rule. "Korath Prime it is," the Zelthan announced. Lights began to flash around the control panel as the simulation loaded. The scenario will begin with both combatants in separate locations within the city. Victory conditions include elimination of the opponent or capture of 3 strategic objectives. Jake stepped into the chamber. The moment his feet crossed the threshold, the world around him changed. He was standing on a street in what had once been a beautiful city. Now it was a ruin of broken buildings and smoking craters. The air tasted of smoke and death, and distant explosions echoed between the shattered towers. "Simulation beginning in 10 seconds, announced a mechanical voice. Jake checked his weapons, a standard assault rifle, a sidearm, and a few grenades. Everything was functional but basic compared to what he knew the general was carrying. Through his helmet's display, he could see environmental readings that made his heart race. The gravity here was 1.5 times Earth normal. The atmosphere was thick with toxic gases that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. The temperature was over 140 degrees Fahrenheit. According to his suit's sensors, this environment was rated as lethal to most known species. "Begin," the mechanical voice announced. Jake immediately moved away from his starting position. In combat, staying still meant dying quickly. He found cover behind a collapsed wall and used his helmet's sensors to scan the area around him. The readings made him pause. According to the suit's systems, he should be struggling to move in this gravity. The toxic atmosphere should be making him dizzy and sick. The heat should be overwhelming his cooling systems. But Jake felt fine. Better than fine, actually. He felt like he was operating at exactly the conditions his body was designed for. A plasma bolt screamed past his head, missing by inches. Jake spun toward the source and saw General Krikstar's massive form moving between the ruins 300 yards away. The general's armor gleamed despite the smoke and dust, and weapon ports along his arms were already charging for another shot. Jake began to move. He didn't run to the next piece of cover. He flowed between obstacles like he was dancing through the ruins. His assault rifle came up smoothly, and he fired 3 quick bursts at the general's position. The shots were perfectly placed to force Krikstar to take cover rather than advance. Through his helmet radio, Jake heard the general's breathing. It was already labored, and they had only been fighting for 30 seconds. The environmental conditions that Jake found comfortable were clearly pushing the Vorthak warrior to his limits. "Impossible," Jake heard one of the watching aliens whisper over the observation channel. How is the human moving so easily in those conditions? Jake decided to test something. He sprinted across an open area that any sane fighter would have avoided. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled the air around him, but somehow none of them connected. It was like he could see the projectiles moving and adjust his path to avoid them. He reached cover on the far side and immediately changed direction again. General Krikstar was trying to predict his movements, but Jake wasn't following any predictable pattern. He was simply moving wherever his instincts told him to go. "What is he doing?" another alien voice asked over the radio. No being should be able to move that fast in 1.5 gravity. Jake found himself in a position where he could see the general clearly. Krikstar was hunched behind a concrete barrier, his massive armor steaming in the toxic atmosphere. Even through the suit's environmental protection, the conditions were clearly wearing him down. Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of taking the easy shot, he began to advance directly toward the general's position. Not carefully from cover to cover, but in a straight line across open ground. General Krikstar saw him coming and opened fire with everything he had. Plasma beams, explosive rounds, and energy pulses filled the air between them. Jake moved through the storm of weapons fire like it was a gentle rain. He twisted, ducked, and weaved, but never slowed down. This is impossible. General Krikstar's voice came over the radio, strained and desperate. Nothing can move like that. Jake was close enough now to see the general's helmet displays through the transparent faceplate. Warning lights were flashing, red all across Krikstar's status board. His suit's cooling system was overloaded, his ammunition was running low, and his power levels were dropping rapidly. The general tried to stand and retreat to a better position, but his movements were slow and clumsy. The environmental conditions that barely affected Jake were crushing the Vorthak warrior, despite his advanced armor. Jake reached the general's position and simply stood there, his rifle pointed at the ground. "Do you yield, General?" Through his faceplate, Jake could see Krikstar's reptilian features twisted with exhaustion and confusion. "How?" the general gasped. "How are you not affected by these conditions?" "What conditions?" Jake asked. The simulation suddenly ended. The ruined city vanished, replaced by the metallic walls of the chamber. Jake and General Krikstar stood facing each other in the center of the sphere, while hundreds of alien beings stared at them in complete silence. Technical readouts appeared on screens around the chamber. Jake's vital signs showed normal heart rate, normal breathing, normal body temperature. General Krikstar's readings looked like those of someone who had just run a marathon while carrying a mountain on his back. The Zelthan delegate's voice cracked with electronic distortion as they spoke. "Lieutenant Morrison, the environmental conditions in that simulation were rated as immediately lethal to most known species. How are you able to operate normally?" Jake removed his helmet and shook the sweat from his hair. He looked around at all the watching aliens, seeing fear and confusion in their alien features. "Lethal? That felt like a nice spring day where I come from." "A spring day?" General Krikstar pulled off his own helmet, revealing a face covered in exhaustion and something that might have been fear. The gravity was 1.5 times standard. The atmosphere was poison. The temperature would cook most beings alive. Jake shrugged. The gravity felt light, actually, and the air wasn't too bad once you got used to it. Around the chamber, alien voices began talking in urgent whispers. Jake caught fragments of conversation in different languages, but certain words kept repeating: "Death world," "impossible," and "what are they?" The ethereal delegate's gaseous form swirled in agitated patterns. "Lieutenant Morrison, what are the environmental conditions on your homeworld?" Jake thought about Earth. Beautiful, green Earth with its comfortable gravity and breathable atmosphere. "Well, our gravity is about standard for us, obviously. Maybe a little stronger than what you have here on the station. Our air has oxygen, nitrogen, some other gases. Why?" "What percentage oxygen?" the Mentari delegate asked, their compound eyes focused intently on Jake. "About 21%, I think." The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the air circulation system humming in the walls. Every alien in the chamber was staring at him like he had just claimed to be made of pure energy. The silence in the chamber stretched on for what felt like hours. Jake stood in the center of the combat simulation sphere, still breathing normally after his easy victory over General Krikstar. Around him, hundreds of alien beings stared with expressions ranging from shock to outright terror. "Class 12 Death World," Jake repeated slowly. "That sounds serious." The ethereal delegates swirled their gaseous form in patterns that Jake was beginning to recognize as extreme agitation. "Lieutenant Morrison, There are only 17 known Class 12 death worlds in the entire galaxy. Most of them are uninhabitable, even with advanced technology. But people live on Earth, Jake said, confused. Billions of people. That's exactly the problem, General Krickstar said quietly. The massive Vorthak warrior was still breathing hard from the simulation, his scarred, face pale with exhaustion. You don't just live on a death world, you evolved there. Jake felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. You mean the conditions that are normal for us are deadly for you? Not just deadly, the Zelton delegate said, their crystalline form flickering with rapid internal lights. The gravity alone would crush most species within hours. The oxygen concentration would poison our blood. The temperature variations would kill us even faster. The Mantari representative clicked their mandibles nervously. How long can humans survive in standard galactic conditions without life support? Jake thought about it. Well, we've been living on this station for several days without any problems. The gravity feels a little light but not uncomfortable. More whispers spread through the watching crowd. Jake caught fragments in different languages, but the tone was universally concerned. He was starting to understand that he had just revealed something that changed everything. General Krickstar, Jake said, turning to the exhausted Vorthak warrior. You said you've studied human military capabilities. What did your reports actually say? The general was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking. Our intelligence indicated that humans are small, weak, and technologically primitive. Your weapons are chemical-based projectiles instead of energy weapons. Your armor is made of simple metals and ceramics instead of advanced composites. But those reports were based on what assumptions? That you were operating under standard galactic conditions, the general admitted. We never considered that your equipment might be designed for a death world environment. Jake nodded slowly. What if I told you that our primitive weapons are designed to function in crushing gravity and toxic atmospheres? That our weak armor is built to protect against environmental conditions that would kill most beings instantly? The chamber fell silent again. Jake could see the aliens processing this information and coming to conclusions that clearly frightened them. There's something else, Jake continued. You keep talking about how small and weak humans are, but you're comparing us to beings who evolved in low gravity and safe environments. What do you mean? The ethereal delegate asked. Jake walked over to one of the standard galactic weight machines near the edge of the chamber. This is rated for what weight range? The Zelthan delegate checked the machine's specifications. 0 to 800. Standard units, that's sufficient for 98% of known species. Jake selected a weight that was near the machine's maximum and lifted it easily with one hand. This is about what a human child might use for exercise. The gasps from the watching aliens were audible even over the chamber's ventilation system. Jake set the weight down gently and continued his explanation. You see, when you live on a world with high gravity, your muscles and bones develop differently. Every step we take is like carrying a heavy load by your standards. Every breath we take is like breathing poison by your standards. General Krickstar was staring at Jake with a mixture of horror and fascination. How long do humans live? About 70 to 80 years on average, sometimes longer. In those conditions? Those are our normal conditions, Jake said patiently. We don't think of them as extreme. The Mantari delegate leaned forward on their 6 legs. What about endurance? How long can a human maintain physical activity? Jake thought about the marathon runners back on Earth. Well, some humans can run for 26 miles without stopping. Others can work physically demanding jobs for 12 hours a day every day, for decades. Run for 26 miles, the ethereal delegate repeated in what sounded like disbelief. In death world gravity. While breathing death world atmosphere, added the Zelthan representative. At death world temperatures, General Krickstar finished quietly. Jake was beginning to understand why the aliens looked so shocked. I'm starting to think there might have been some misunderstandings about human capabilities. Misunderstandings, the general repeated flatly. Yes, I suppose you could call them that. One of the Sauran delegates in the viewing area stood up. Lieutenant Morrison, how do humans handle combat stress? What happens to your species when faced with life-threatening situations? Jake considered the question. Well, we have something called adrenaline. When we're in danger, our bodies release chemicals that make us stronger, faster, and more alert. We can ignore pain and keep fighting even when we're badly injured. For how long? Hours, if necessary. Some humans have been known to fight for days without rest when their families or communities are threatened. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Around the chamber, alien beings were staring at him like he had just described transforming into a monster. You become stronger when threatened? The ethereal delegate asked quietly. And faster? And able to ignore pain? While operating in conditions that would kill us instantly? Jake nodded to each question. It's a normal survival response. Most humans don't even think about it. General Krikstar stood up slowly, his massive frame still trembling slightly from exhaustion. Lieutenant Morrison, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Of course. During our combat simulation, were you fighting at your full capability? Jake felt his face flush slightly. Well, no. I was trying to be diplomatic. This was supposed to be a friendly demonstration, not a real fight. What percentage of your capability would you estimate you were using? Jake thought about it honestly. He had been moving carefully, avoiding showing off, trying not to completely humiliate the general. Maybe 30%? I didn't want to. Make you look bad in front of everyone. The sound that came from General Krikstar might have been laughter or might have been a sob. 30%, he repeated. You defeated me using 30% of your capability. I wasn't trying to defeat you, Jake protested. I was just trying to prove that humans aren't as weak as you thought. Mission accomplished, the general said dryly. The Zelthan delegate's crystalline form was flashing rapidly now. Lieutenant Morrison, we need to understand the full scope of human capabilities. How many of your species possess these abilities? All of us, Jake said simply. I'm not special. I'm just a regular soldier. Most humans are stronger than me, actually. The reaction to this statement was immediate and dramatic. Several alien delegates stood up quickly. Some began talking urgently into communication devices, and a few actually backed away from the chamber. All humans, the ethereal delegate said slowly. 7 billion beings with these capabilities. 8 billion, actually, Jake corrected. The population has grown since first contact. At that moment, the chamber doors opened, and Ambassador Helen Carter entered with the rest of the human diplomatic team. She took one look at Jake standing in the center of the room, surrounded by terrified aliens, and immediately understood that something significant had happened. Lieutenant Morrison, she said calmly, I hope you haven't been causing too much trouble. Jake looked around at the hundreds of alien faces staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to terror. I think there may have been some miscommunications about human capabilities, Ambassador. Ambassador Carter smiled slightly. I see. Well, I suppose that's why we're here for diplomatic talks. General Krikstar stepped forward, his movements careful and respectful. Ambassador Carter, I believe we need to revise our previous assessments of humanity's place in galactic civilization. Oh? Ambassador Carter raised an eyebrow. And what place would that be, General? The massive Vorthak warrior was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its earlier arrogance. Perhaps we should discuss mutual defense treaties instead of protection arrangements. Around the chamber, alien delegates began nodding agreement. The conversation had shifted completely. No one was talking about human limitations anymore. Instead, Jake could hear whispered discussions about alliance possibilities and mutual benefits. Ambassador Carter looked at Jake with approval. Well, done, Lieutenant. I think you've successfully represented humanity's interests. Jake looked around at all the alien faces watching him with new respect and wariness. I just told them the truth about life on Earth. Sometimes, Ambassador Carter said with a smile, the truth is the most powerful weapon of all.